Sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyapsuchi Dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog. Okay. So one way of presenting the levels of practice, the levels of teachings, the levels of practice, which are expressed in this packaging, of Tsongkhapas called the Lamrim, this gradual path, this course that you graduate as a Buddha from, is in terms of understanding attachment. This is massive for the Buddha, way bigger than we can think, because it's assuming even the way the world is, how we're born, the kind of bodies we have. It's got a much bigger framework than we can think of, So effectively, the actual delusion that's the source of all suffering is this thing called ego grasping, that the realization of emptiness cuts. And all the teachings lead to that. But effectively in daily life we can say attachment's the main problem. This bottomless pit of dissatisfaction and neediness that causes the anger and aversion, then causes all the other things, which causes us to harm others, which cause suffering, rebirths, and so on and so on and so on. So when we understand attachment is the main problem, then junior school is learning to control the servants of the attachment, which is the body and speech, obviously. I mean, we think we're so caught up in our own world, in the modern world, as me, I am this body, that's it. We're so utterly identified with the body. We make the body the boss, as Lamrim says, totally, completely absorbed in the body. This is me, And then if we do say words about my mind, we point to the brain. I mean, we've learned that. We haven't experienced the truth of that. We learn it. We've never studied the brain, most of us. We just believe what we're told. We think we're so intelligent, think we're scientific. It's just nonsense. Most of us haven't studied maths, haven't studied science, haven't studied, botany, haven't studied all the things that some people have. We just say it's true because we believe it. We think we're scientific. No, we haven't studied it. We just believe what we're told. So we totally identify with this body. This body is massive. The senses run the show. And they're the servants of attachment. That's it. So obviously the first job, because attachment is so primordial, you've got to start controlling the servants of the attachment, which is the body and speech, which is our behavior. Our behavior. Do what your grandma says. Behave nicely. Don't harm others. It's kind of fundamental, So obviously, by controlling the body and speech, the servants of attachment, you're naturally subduing attachment. It's very evident. Now you're really qualified to go to high school and get to the root of the problem and begin to understand and unpack all the delusions, in particular attachment. You become your own therapist, this ingenious person who can unpack and unravel the mind to this unbelievable degree, including getting this incredible concentration we described this morning. Inconceivable, unheard of in our modern psychology, just seen as religion, like we just throw it away as some kind of rubbish, Have no idea how astonishing it is, how sophisticated, how brilliant. And anyone, if they worked hard, could do it, It's all there. Coming from these amazing Hindus thousands of years ago, before the Buddha. These geniuses who mapped the mind internally. It's so mind-blowing. And by this point, you've got your renunciation. You're incredible. As Lama says, you've got renunciation, which means two parts. One, you know what suffering is, and two, you're sick and you're sick of it. And two, now bullseye, you know the causes, karma and delusions. So now you've got renunciation. As he said, you've got renunciation when just the thought of another moment of attachment. That's a thought. For us, it's the default mode, but just the thought of it is like so disgusting, so repulsive, like being in a septic tank. That's the way to go. That's pretty profound. And how you'd be so far? Radiant, joyful, content, fulfilled, happy. You'd be an incredible human being by now. Now you go further. You haven't got rid of attachment yet. You haven't realized emptiness yet. Today you go to the compassion wing and you start to realize, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Look at this nightmare. How can I must help. If I don't, who will? So you develop this amazing bodhicitta. And by this point, you might not yet even have realized emptiness, but you are so astonishing, so phenomenal, so amazing in your compassion and your wisdom that now you could argue, if you use the analogy of the chocolate cake, first level of chocolate cake, first level of practice, leave the chocolate cake on the plate, please. Control your body and speech. Next level, you can begin to even enjoy the cake now without going too berserk because your attachment's so under control. Now the bodhisattva level, you'll happily eat chocolate cake for the sake of others and it's not even going to affect you. Because your compassion is so astonishing and your wisdom. Now you get to Tantra, the highest level, postgraduate. Now you consciously, actively will eat chocolate cake. You will actively eat chocolate cake. Why? Because you want to activate attachment. Why? Because attachment, given the way the body is described, this tantric, it's very technical, Lamrim says. The great tantric yogis and the Hindus before that understand intricately the phenomenal, the subtlety of the physical and mental energies. And the way we're constructed based on attachment creating this body of desire. And because of the relationship of attachment to the triggering of pleasure, these great yogis have found, as we can hear it even in single point of concentration, that the mind has this phenomenal capacity for bliss. It's its nature. It's how it's made. So tantric techniques utilize this capacity. So because attachment's the catalyst. Attachment is the energy on the basis of this body. Attachment is what we use to trigger bliss. So in the beginning, we're berserk, so we go out of control. We're like animals and like junkies. So now, because we're completely controlled, we can actually actively contact the object, which will actively energize attachment, which in turn actively energizes bliss. So when you've got concentration, the great yogis can utilize this bliss. It's like a rocket, it's like an extra rocket that gets the mind to an even subtler level, even subtler than shamatha, because tantric methods are so profound. So in Tantra, the general idea is all the delusions are grist for the mill. You're so advanced, you're so together, you're so in control, and because of the nature of the way the body's constructed and the relationship to a mind, this bliss is used on the path to enlightenment, and all the delusions can be used on the path to enlightenment. So it's the most sophisticated level of Buddhist psychology, Buddhist practice. The goal is the same. From junior school to postgraduate, the goal is the same, Buddhahood. Just these techniques that you cultivate as you move forward. So as I've said already, another way of describing practice in Tantra is in terms of these different, archetypes. You can call them archetypes if you like. Jung would like that. These different manifestations of different qualities, different psychological qualities that we either want to purify or cultivate. So Tantra is including, for example, Vajrayogini is, she's depicted as this blissful, embodiment of desire. Gorgeous, naked, cute little breasts, totally gorgeous. She's the manifestation of purified desire. And these very complex practices that one does that enable one to activate this part of oneself. I mean, actually it's quite sophisticated. I don't know much, but it's just the general idea I think is interesting to hear, that's all. So of course you have to be qualified. You can't go to postgraduate on day one, You've got to do junior school, high school, university first. It's obvious. That's why it's so important to remember to use those analogies. We get them. Say first scope, second scope, third scope. What do we mean? I mean, it doesn't tell us anything. We don't get it because we don't use those logic. We don't use those terms. But we know knowledge is gradual. All courses you do are gradual. It's very common sense. So this doesn't mean you have to perfect junior school before you get to high school. And that's the same in maths. You can pass grade 1, but when you pass grade 2, you can do grade 1 even better. So the same here. So we can do all these things, including enter into Tantra. And you don't think you're going to get realizations today, but you sow the seeds. So you can practice any one of these levels every day, depending on what skills you need, what tools you need. So like I said before, if at some point you've got to control your mouth, well, that's junior school. Another time you might control your mind, that's high school. Another time you might reach out and be kind to somebody, that's university. And another time you might say a mantra, visualize Tara, that's postgraduate. So you can practice all of them. But you won't realize postgraduate until you've realized the previous one. You can't realize that until you've realized renunciation, and so on and so forth. So the prerequisites for entering into Tantra, 3, basically, minimum 3. These 3 principal aspects of the path. We on the first day, we did that Tsongkhapa, those verses. So you've got to have at least a reasonable understanding and appreciation for renunciation, junior school and high school, which means understanding delusions, understanding suffering and its causes, the 4 noble truths. Suffering, first noble truth; second, causes, karma and delusions. Understanding and appreciating that, that's a renunciation. Then you need a reasonable understanding and appreciation for bodhicitta, which you learn in university. And then you need a reasonable understanding and appreciation for emptiness, which is taught in the final stages of the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva. That's the prerequisites for entering into Tantra. But you'd also say the main thing would be really strong confidence in the path, strong, very content and confident in the stages of the path, Buddhist stages of the Buddhist path. Confidence, confide, with faith, with trust. They talk about faith in Buddhism a lot, but we have a misconception when we hear faith that it's, as we would talk as a Christian, it has to be blind faith. That's reasonable, because you can't prove God is right. That's inappropriate. You trust Him blindly. Nothing wrong. That's that path. Here, the word faith, you have to have that. If you go to an acupuncturist, you need to have good faith in that doctor, not because they're cute. It's because you've checked up on their reputation, you've checked up on the stuff, and you've got confidence, confide, with faith. So we actually have it every day in our own world. We just don't think of it as faith, that's all. So it's clear the same here. You have to have faith in your school teacher. She's not leading you up a garden path. It's obvious. But it's based on intelligence, based on your checking up. You're confident. That's important, because you're the one who has to do it. I have great faith in my lamas, Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe. I chose them. I decided I want them to lead me to my Buddhahood. So I have to have confidence in them. Otherwise, why choose them? So faith is based on intelligence, wisdom, not foolishness. That's reasonable, because it's catch-22. When you first start learning math and your teacher tells you 1 + 1 is 2, you've never heard such an idea before. How can you know she's true? You can't. So you have to have confidence. Okay, Mum sends us there, we don't choose. But anything you learn, you have to check up on the teacher so that you're prepared to spend your money and time in learning a whole new body of knowledge. You do your research first. We get that. Same here. And then as you progress, you keep ticking the boxes, don't you? Oh, well, they told me this. Oh, well, they told me that. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that's true. You keep moving forward, proving it as you go, 1 step at a time. And indeed, as the Dalai Lama said, if you keep moving on practicing Buddha's methodology, and you get to a point where you can prove he's wrong, well, of course you must reject him. It's completely reasonable. That's what he did with the Hindus. He diverged from them, from his own experience. So, okay, like I've been saying, what you actually practice, actual practice is when you start working on your mind. That's the actual job. Controlling your body and speech, that's shared by good communists, good Catholics, and good Muslims. That's not unique. Okay, maybe Buddha's view about reincarnation is unique, but morality, ethics, good behavior, that's common to the universe. But the Buddha's approach is when you get to high school, and his view of the mind, how it functions, the distinction between delusions and virtues, that's distinct to the Buddha. That's when you become a Buddhist. That's the bottom line. All the way from here to enlightenment, what you're doing is distinguishing between the delusions and the virtues, lessening delusions and growing virtues, eventually ridding the mind of delusions and perfecting virtues. That's it. Buddha, Sangye. Bye-bye. That's it. That's the job. So you got to do, but that's the job. That is being a Buddhist. But the Buddhist approach would be that we're so deluded for so many eons of time, so many lifetimes, that the delusions are so primordial, so ingrained, that to do the job of ridding the mind of delusions and growing the virtues is so astonishingly high that we need masses and masses and masses of work to prepare us to even be able to understand it theoretically, you know. So that's where all the other parts of Buddhist practice fit in, the so-called religious bits. This is especially in Tibetan Buddhism, in the Vajrayana system. And I think we understand that, you know. You see a person playing Bach, it's like phenomenal. But look at the years and years and years of exercises. You have to do boring arpeggios and scales. I mean, like boring. To prime your mind and your hands to be able to play the astonishing music. If you just want, you go to basketball, it looks so easy getting the ball in the hoop. That's the bottom line for basketball. But look at the years and years of practice to prime your body and mind to be able to get the ball in the hoop. The point of basketball is the ball in the hoop. The point of playing Bach is the hands whizzing up and down the piano. The point of being a Buddhist is to work on your mind. But we've got to prime our mind by doing lots of practices. That's certainly the Tibetan Buddhist one. That's where all this other stuff fits in. To us, it's stuff that looks like religious ritual. But the point is, if there is anything in Buddhism that is merely a ritual, that's merely some superstitious belief, is complete nonsense. Throw it back, give it right back to Buddha. He can keep his nonsense. If there's a single technique, a single syllable, a single instruction, a single meditation, a single philosophical concept that isn't finally to help you do the job of ridding the mind of rubbish and getting goodness, then it's a load of rubbish. Don't do it. It's nonsense. So, of course, part of the battle is to get to see the logic of all these techniques that look so weird. Of course, because it's a culture that we don't understand. It's not our culture. But what's a ritual? A ritual is anything you do with your body and speech that you do in a culture. If you go to Tibetans and you meet a Tibetan person who's never met a Westerner and you poke your hand at them with a big beam on your face, with your hand stuck in front of their face, and you want them to shake your hand. But they've never heard of shaking hands. He looks at you with a puzzle on his face. And then you take his hand, he's all wimpy, like this wimpy hand. He doesn't know you're supposed to hold it strongly and yank it up and down. He doesn't know that. He's never heard of it. Because it's what we do in our culture. Everything we do with our body, all day. We just did a movie of a person all day without sound. You'd see this mad person. Put their finger up their nose sometimes, put some stuff in their mouth and go chew, 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 go to a toilet and go burk and stuff comes out. It's all just rituals, all just body and speech, just doing things that we have given meaning to, that we now take for granted and think are real. But they're just things they're just things you do with your body and speech. That's the way you live. So we do our prostrations. It's called Buddhist ritual. Well, it's just a very elaborate handshake, that's all. Just what they do. In Asia. Very humble kind of handshake. You put your hand here, put your hand there, ponk your legs down, put your knees up. Do you do this and you do that? You give it meaning, suddenly it's got meaning. If something's got meaning, then it's not a ritual. If it's just a ritual, it's got no meaning. That's how we think of rituals. It's just meaningless. But it's just the way cultures are. Everyone does something differently, So, for example, when you're among Tibetans, like I said, the rudest thing to do is poke your feet out. It's like you're baring your bottom. So I remember sitting at a teaching in South India with Dalai Lama and all the Tibetan monks, and they're sitting in front, and one of them's got and we're sitting cross-legged. And if like the worst thing to do for Westerners in Tibetans is not cross your legs. It's so rude. You've got to cross your legs. It's polite. To poke your legs out is so rude. Like I said, like exposing your bottom. But there was this Tibetan monk in front of me with his, what do you call that thing you clean your ears with? What's it called? Who? A what? A bud. No, it's got a long stick with a piece of white stuff on it. What's that called? A Q-tip. A Q-tip? A what? Everyone's got a different name, obviously. That one. The stick with a bit of white stuff on the end. There he was, elaborately, cleaning his ears and looking at the contents of it, swapping ears in the middle of the teaching with the Dalai Lama. That's not rude for them. So it shows everything's just contextual. Everything's empty. Everything's how you think about it. So everything you do with your body and speech, if it's true, when we think of a person who's mad, who's out of their brain, they're doing things with their body and speech that have no meaning. That's exactly right. This is exactly right. So the Buddha would say most of what we do with our body and speech is meaningless. Putting food in one hole, some stuff coming out another hole, sticking a thing in another hole. It's called samsara. It's called attachment. It's called the meaning of attachment, And it's self-centered and deluded and just cause you suffering. So of course this is medieval. I mean, this really is medieval. Look at it. It looked like this in the 14th century. These cloaks are medieval. Look at them. Probably that old. My robes are 14th century. It's true, it is old. It's medieval. It's Tibetan. It's true. Not Australian, not American. So I'm sure at some point we'll adjust things to our culture, won't we? You know. So it's true also, this is not the essence. I mean, these drums, you won't see those somewhere else, with dragons on them. Look at it, you know. So if something has meaning and you find it useful, then it's up to you to learn that meaning, isn't it? Like there's Thousand Arm Chen Reizig, just this funny looking person with several heads and 1,000 arms. So it's like hilarious. But if you give it meaning and buy into that meaning, then suddenly it has meaning for you, and so it's valid. Right there, it's valid. Prostrations, if you understand the meaning, is valid. Making water bowl offerings, when you understand the meaning, it's valid. You decide to make it meaningful. Yes, it's old-fashioned. Yes, it's another culture. But so what? If it's got meaning and it's going to help you work on your mind, then go for it. It's up to you to find out. We don't have to stick with culture. That's what happens, you know. When people go to Zen centers and then all the Americans running around trying to act like Japanese people. It's hilarious. It's ridiculous. People trying to act like Tibetans. I mean, it's hilarious. It's absurd. We stick up prayer flags, you know. We don't have to have them, but I mean, we just think we've got to replicate Tibetan behavior. It's ridiculous. Don't have to. But if it's got meaning and you choose to do it, then that's different. So whether, the Japanese style of doing things, Tibetan style of doing things, Australian style of doing things, the essence of it, that's for me when I first became a Buddhist. When I'd been a radical feminist. It was really intense for me. 10 years of intensive political activity, going through hippie, communist, black politics, feminist. When I first heard feminist, I thought the word was femininist. I didn't even know what it meant. Then I heard radical feminist. I thought, well, that's nice. I like radical. Then I heard that, then being radical, being extremist, then naturally I then became a lesbian feminist, a radical lesbian feminist. Then I became a radical lesbian separatist feminist. You can't go further than that. So all the men were the enemies. First it was the non-Catholics were the enemies. Then the straight people were the enemies. Then the rich people were the enemies. And the white people were the enemies. And then the males were the enemies. There was no one left, I promise. So when I was a feminist, I lived with my friends on Amazon acres. My friend Karen, she bought this property and it was called Amazon acres. We wouldn't even let the boys, if you had a thing between your legs, we didn't talk to you. Men were the enemy. Anyway, what am I getting at here? Something. So then I realised I couldn't hate most of the human race. I had to change that. So then I finally bumped into these lamas after Mr. Bill Bright ran over my foot and I couldn't do karate. And I was in a state of absolute shock. Culture shock when I got to Chen Reizig Institute, when I met the lamas. Truly shock, culture shock. I'd been so intensely involved in politics, which is a really kind of intense world. Serious, radical politics, Then suddenly, and I started off being a hippie, and here I am 10 years later, and I'm reverting to 10 years ago. It was like absolute culture, all these hippies. I'd done that 10 years before, I was absolutely shocked. I can't describe to you. The culture shock was phenomenal. I was in shock. But I heard these teachings, and I didn't understand Lama Zopa one bit. I did Lama Yeshe, and I understood. But something told me this is what I had to persevere with. But it was so shocking, because the men sat in front of the women, the monks were more important than nuns, all this kind of Asian stuff, And I realised clearly that, and I heard them say, you got to check up. Buddha says, don't just believe it. The one thread that was there, So I did that. And then it became clear to me, if the Buddhist view is the valid one, it was about the view I want to take, then your mind is not male, is not female, is not American, is not Tibetan, is not 15th century. Mind is just mind. It happens to manifest in different cultures over the centuries. So they're just externals, There can be validity to them. Nothing wrong with that. But then I realised the mind is not male or female. Then this is how come I'm here 40 years later, 42 years later or something. It seems to me, finally, when it comes down to it, we're talking about the mind. So I can accept and appreciate these, and they're indeed still in the 14th century Tibetan framework, because that's what's existing right now. So out of respect, I'll use those skills. But they're not in their nature 14th century. They're not in their nature male or female. They work for your mind or they don't. So that's up to us to find out, So sure, over the time, maybe these rituals will take a different shape. Clothing will take a different form. They're just external. But doesn't mean you chuck them out with the bathwater. They still have meaning. You see the meaning and you buy into it. It's like a language. When I look at Tibetan, I never learned Tibetan, I just see these squiggles, you know. English is just looking, Roman letters are squiggles for Tibetans. It's just relative reality. So things that you do with your body and speech have meaning, but you give it meaning. Whether it's 14th century or 21st century, it doesn't matter. So not to chuck the baby out the bathwater. So the real function of the benefit, they say, this is the Tibetan Buddhist one, the Vajrayana one, the benefit of all these practices, they're all practices that are related to the Buddha. They're related, frankly, to devotion. So when I was a Catholic, that was the main part for me. I was in love with God. I was in love with Our Lady. I was in love with the saints. Went to Mass 7 mornings a week, learned all the things in Latin, went to benediction, went to confession, did communion, did the works, you know. So that part for me never was a problem with Tibetan Buddhism. Never a problem at all. Felt very comfortable. But I could see early on it was a technique, it was a method for opening the heart. I think that's the point. There's the intellect, and then we have the heart. So the intellect, for me, I love that part. That was the part that I was missing as a Catholic. I absolutely was hungry for a view. That's why I went through all my different political things, looking for a view, a world view. So that's what I found with Buddhism. It blissed me out, you know. But I could always see there's no contradiction between that and the devotional part. So the devotional part is where you open your heart. And that's where, for me, you know, the idea of the Buddha and manifesting as a human for me. So Lama Yeshe Lama Zopa, my teachers that I chose. It's the same with I keep saying it this way, but I mean it. It's the same with anything. When I learned a cake from my mother, a cake, I could have learned a recipe from a book, but it was so powerful getting it from my mother. It was a transmission of knowledge. My mind was ready, she was a knowledge holder, and I got the cakes first time. So that was the benefit of a person. My heart was open. So with Lama Yeshe Lama Zopa, my teachers, who embody all these things for me. So when I do my practices, all the practices we do, like Chenrezig, Tara, all these things, yeah, medieval ladies, look at that, not more than medieval, they're 2,000 years old. The forms, Indian. But you know, when I have the meaning of it and then I do the Tara, I'm thinking of my teacher, Lama Zopa's mind, manifesting as Tara. So it makes it personal. It makes it personal. Just like if you want to learn tennis, you have a picture of Federer on your wall. He's the embodiment of tennis for you. Then you'll trust him and do what he says. So all these practices coming from India, coming from Tibet, the prostrations, making offerings, visualizing Buddha this way, saying that Sanskrit mantra that way. It is an ancient system, it's true. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's not valid. No one throws out Bach because he was 400 years ago. That's the part, this is where your heart comes in, and it seems to me it moves the mind, opens the heart, enables you to lessen anger, lessen arrogance, lessen attachment, lessen ego, which is kind of at a subtler level. So it's easier to work on your mind when your mind is open, when your heart is open. So as Prabhupada Rinpoche says, choose your guru very carefully. You're going to end up like them. So if you choose a peanut, you'll become a peanut. You do peanut things, so be careful. Anyway, am I making any sense? I'm just raving on here as usual. All right. I don't know what to talk about. You have to ask me some questions. Come on. I think we have to talk more about emptiness. We only just touched on that briefly. Well, we should, because it's the 6 perfections. It's the last 2 of the perfections. We went through the first 4. So they're the perfection of the compassion wing. You bop along life after life after life, perfecting those 4, increasing your amazing qualities, smashing ego grasping and delusions, and self-cherishing and benefiting sentient beings, and also hooking countless beings, so that when they're ready, you can lead them to enlightenment. Then the last 2 is what you perfect in your meditation: concentration, shamatha, and insight. So this word vipassana. So Buddha taught many vipassana techniques. The one that's popular in the world, that's practically its own religion these days, is actually a certain technique based on concentration, the first mode of meditation, that you then use to then scan I've never done it, scan the sensations of your body. And the insight Buddha wants you to get from doing that is into impermanence. There are many insight meditations. They're methods that were cultivated to help you get insight into different things. Well, here in the Mahayana path, in the sixth perfection, it's insight into emptiness. It's the final job we have to do, based on the fifth one, which is called concentration, the last two of these six perfections. So each of these is a meditation style labeled in terms of the result. So calm abiding, shamatha, is the name given to the first technique, and it's the end result of it. It's called single-pointed concentration. This other Sanskrit word, samadhi. As Lama described some of the benefits, this morning. Well, your mind is laser-like, sharp and subtle. And we have to get to that level, because to remove the delusions finally from the mind, because they're so primordial, we have to have the most sophisticated, subtlest level of mind. We can't possibly do it at the conceptual level. Impossible. We have to get that subtle, non-conceptual state of mind. In concentration meditation, and then you use it in the second mode, where you develop insight, here very specifically, into emptiness. So we don't use these words in daily life, so of course we mystify them. We hear these words and we don't understand what we're saying. So I just always find it so helpful to use ordinary examples, because this is just a Tibetan and then Indian way of saying things that's been cultivated over the centuries, that is necessarily very different from how we talk. So because it's foreign, we mystify it. But let's look at our ordinary experiences. My teacher tells me that 1 + 1 is 2. It's a concept. I've never heard it before. And she wants me, doesn't she, to get an experience of that. She wants me to get an insight into that, doesn't she? She won't use that word, but that we know that's what she wants. And what she'll tell me is, take this information, Robina, and go home and do your homework. And what she means is, and it's reasonable, what I'd need to do when I go home, I'll have to have the information accurate. If I've written down 1 + 1 is 3, I'll be in trouble. I have to have the right words. That's conceptual. Then I go home, and obviously, she won't say it like this, but it's very obvious. I need to get some concentration, because if I can't focus on it, I won't get the answer. It's pretty obvious you need concentration first. It's pretty obvious. So I've got to go to my desk, close the door, tell my sisters to shut up, get myself a condition so I get some focus. That's concentration. That's the first mode. I can't do anything without that. That's pretty clear. What do I do now? I'll go to the second mode to get insight into this thing. That's the real work. And the only reason you've got concentration, although it's got some wonderful byproducts like we read, the only reason to have concentration, because that's the level of mind that's capable of thinking through the information. So the penny can drop and I can go, oh, I get it. So what do I do to do that? I use my noggin. I have the information written down on a piece of paper. I've got a bit of focus. I now go to the second mode and I try to get insight. I try to understand the meaning. So I'll use my pencil maybe, and I might use my blocks. I'll use different methods. In other words, I'll use my thinking method. I'll use my capacity to think. And then at some point it will trigger the aha moment. Oh, I get it. Well, that's an insight, isn't it? That's what we're trying to do here. Get the insights into emptiness. So it does take longer, that's all. So you've got to have concentration, otherwise your mind's a mess. And you've got to then use your intelligence to get insight. So how do you get that? So that, as we know, if we've studied Tibetan Buddhism, you hear a term called analytical meditation. That completely throws us, because we assume meditation is single-pointed meditation. We assume meditation is no thoughts. We have these cliched ideas. But actually, it throws us even more. The Tibetan word for the verb to meditate is the verb to familiarize. We're really surprised. What's that mean? Well, the real point of meditation is not shamatha. That's just the sharpening your knife. That's just honing your mind. So you can do the real work in the second mode. You've got to get some concentration so you can do the real work of understanding 1 + 1 is 2. So what's the method you use? You use thinking. You use intelligent thinking. That's how we study anything. When we say think about something, we have a very general idea, kind of a bit messy kind of thinking something through. But no, when you're studying music, it's very methodical thinking, isn't it? Very logical thinking. When you're studying math, it's logical thinking. When you're studying cooking, it's logical thinking. It's not kind of weird, random thinking, you know? So analytical meditation is analytical is a fancy word for to think about something, but intelligently, coherently, like you would with cooking and music. Same here. So you go to the typical one is the Lama talked about in Mahamudra in the monastery. He'd go to his class with his geshe, study all his philosophy, and they didn't write things down. They just memorized it. They were astonishing. Then they go home to his little place with his friend, his monk. Then they'd discuss it with each other, and then they'd sit in their own corner, and then they would go through in their mind, so-called meditating on it. That means here, get some focus, go to the second mode, and then remember the words they learned, 1 + 1 is 2, or karma, or emptiness, or whatever it is. Remember it, and with concentration, think it through logically, coherently, until the penny drops. So insight is the result of thinking. The method you use is thinking, but intelligent, coherent thinking. And then the result comes, the insight comes, the penny drops. That's how we learn everything. So it's nothing special. But as soon as we hear the words meditation, we completely lose the plot. But it's the methodology we've used to learn anything at all. So insight is the result of analysis, intelligent, clear thinking on whatever topic it might be. Karma, impermanence, emptiness, whatever. The method's the same. But concentration is the necessary state of mind you need to make your thinking really excellent. And this is the interesting point too. When you've got concentration, when you've got shamatha, it is necessarily non-conceptual, necessarily. But when your mind's at that level, it's not as if you're kind of lost in non-conceptuality. You can, as Tsongkhapa says, you can use it in any way you like. At this subtle level, you can have subtle analysis. And because it's subtle, the analysis is so sophisticated. Like Lama said, you can have the courageous view, I can count every atom in the universe. They say the mind is so amazing at that level. You can think through anything, you can do anything with that mind. You don't just sit there blissing out in non-conceptuality. You use it at that subtle level to think through in the most sophisticated way to finally get to have insight into how things don't have an inherent nature. And it's only that level of mind that's capable. So it's a super sophisticated level of conceptuality, super sophisticated, subtle level of amazing, brilliant thinking. You can make it conceptual yourself because the mind's so brilliant. Are we communicating here? The mind of a yogi is like, when you think of a person with this massive whiteboard, like these genius mathematicians, that's the mind of a yogi, but 1 billion times more clever. As Lama said, even more brilliant than scientific instruments. He's not joking. He's not joking. This is not our view in the West, because we don't understand this view at all. The mind is beyond brilliant. And when you see yogis, they've got and when we think of a yogi, we think of a person spacing out. But they've got these genius minds, brilliant minds. So all these, there's a friend of ours, Karina, who's got a son who's about now 12 or something. She's got several kids, whatever. But this little boy, when he was first very small, he was like this, the world calls him autistic, like high, what do you call high maintenance autistic, genius little mind, a genius little mind. At the age of 1 and 2, just genius, brilliant, but wild energy, out of control. And she was really worried about him. So, she's a Buddhist. I said, for God's sake, talk to Lama Zopa. So he's clairvoyant, he can see the kid's mind. So he gives him all these practices to memorize. He memorizes things like nothing, So anyway, I said to her, I think I mentioned this. I said, send a picture of him to the Tibetan doctor. These Tibetan doctors are lamas, they're geniuses. They also know the body intimately and the mind. So she said a few of his symptoms. Like up at 5 in the morning, at bed at 10, unceasing, like a maniac kid. And he looked at the picture and he said, yeah, that's how yogis behave. And now he's like his little genius little scientist, you know. His mind's his mind is brilliant. That's the sign of a yogi's mind, brilliant mind. Now, we can say though, we could argue, many people in the West who are so brilliant, with brilliant minds, have been yogis in the past, but they've lost the virtue part, you know, just become clever. Several of the monks at Kopan, when Lama Zopa came back here in 71 and he was kind of formally given back the cave, and then he fulfilled his wish from his promise from the last life to start a school for the children, for the kids, that meant the boys, a monastery. So 30 of the local kids were started, and they began, it was like around here somewhere, it was called Mount Everest Centre. Lama Yeshe named it. And then they'd stay up here in the summer, and then they'd go down in the winter at Kopan. By about the second year, 72 or something, they stayed at Kopan. That's how come it developed, that monastery. So 4 of those kids were previous reincarnated yogis, you know, Rinpoches as they call. Rinpoche means precious one. And they've been formally recognised, like Lama Zopa, as a previous meditator. So one of them, can't think of his name now, his previous one, but they're all disrobed now, they're all left the monastery. But one of them, Gyalé Gyatso, he was what the world would call autistic, but the other kind, totally quiet, totally shy, completely unsocial, never looked anybody in the eye, but he's just a genius little yogi. Reincarnation, I'm going to be humble. And he had this is the kind of yogi mind. He just would observe these Westerners who would come. He learned plumbing, electricity, engineering, architecture, computers, building by watching, just by watching. And he built Kopan. All those young monks now, he's gone, but the other monks who manage those buildings, they've just learned by watching. They didn't go to school. They learned by watching. Their minds are so brilliant, absolutely ingenious, brilliant minds. But they've also got ethics, you know. That's the meditator. That's the meditator's mind. It's effortless. Even this kid, he's like 12 now. When he had a little television channel for a while, a YouTube channel. I think he stopped doing it now. But he'd just look into any topic, like why is the sky blue? And he'd give you this 7-minute lecture in perfect English, with not a single mistake in the words, as he's talking. Perfect. Have you seen his channel? Yeah. You seen? Yeah. Or why, you know, how did the world begin, or water, why does it rain, or anything. He just learned it and he articulates it perfectly. There's a little perfect English. As he's talking, every comma, every full stop is perfect, you know. This mind of a yogi. They do practices together, and they're doing one time the Shirigaba mantra, which is really long and complicated. And after about the 3rd day, Karina, they're doing a few mantras, and she looks over, and there he is, he's memorized it. He's like a little genius, you know. That's how yogis behave. That's so interesting. And because there's no, I mean, you know, so when you are at that level and you've got no delusions, then it's effortless. Your mind is effortless, effortless, effortless. I don't know what I'm talking about. What were we talking about? Sorry, I'm lost. Was there a topic? Oh, emptiness. Okay, good. Let's talk about emptiness. The two things. Okay, right. Okay, insight and meditation. Okay, concentration and insight. Let's talk more about emptiness then. Okay, let's talk about emptiness. As I said, you know, in the first scope, junior school, you're learning about karma. So karma, the law of cause and effect. Karma, that everything exists as a result of previous causes. So this is a really powerful. This is the first level of an example of the first level of dependent arising. Buddha's slogan, as Dalai Lama said one time, or the fact that everything that exists in the impermanent world comes into existence in dependence upon causes. Well, that's hardly rocket science. We know that. We call it science. But here, the way to apply it is in relation to the product called me, not called cups and gardens. That the product called me, rather than being, which is what ego thinks, this innocent victim, this concrete lump of something that someone else dared to make and plonk me on this planet and then give me happiness and unhappiness without any warning. I mean, no wonder we're neurotic. We think that. And we do think that. Buddha says a load of rubbish. That what this lump of me is this dynamic result of a series of lots of causes, the main causes being what has been put into this consciousness that's called my mind. So I'm experiencing the fruits of my actions. So that's an example of dependent arising, that things exist in dependence upon causes, but because it's me, it loosens the grip of this self-pity me, the ignorance me. It's a powerful example of applying dependent arising and already helping us that realize, therefore, I am this dynamic result of causes, therefore there is no inherent me here. Remember when I studied with my philosophy teacher, Geshe Tekchok, when I first became a nun. And he used the example, in understanding dependent arising of causes, he used the example of a person called Robina, which is obviously why I remember it. And he said it can be said that everything in the universe up to the first moment of Robina is validly a cause and a condition for the existence of Robina. Well, I thought that was pretty cosmic. But if you analyze that, it's true. You take this, a lid that's made of clay and paint and this and that. So that came from this, which came from that, which came from this, which came from that, which came from this. And you keep going back, you'll get back to the first moment of the first Big Bang. You'll keep going, and that'll include everything in the universe. It's logical. That's called dependent arising of causes. So as soon as you say it's dependent arising, you loosen the grip of this big lump of some independent self-pity me. It's powerful. That's in junior school. Now you go to high school and you start to learn about the mind. And you start to learn about delusions and how their key function is that they embellish, that they're liars, that they're delusions, that they cause us to not be in touch with reality, that they exaggerate, that they make stories up. There's no valid referent object for those thoughts. You learn that, and you learn about attachment and aversion and all the other delusions. That prepares you to go to the next level now to understand the root delusion. So you prepared your mind perfectly to understand dependent arising, and you prepared your mind perfectly to understand how delusions function. Then it's easy to understand emptiness. But if you leap into emptiness first, it's completely confusing to us. So all Buddha's saying is that this root delusion, known as ignorance, but known colloquially, we can call it ego grasping, which is very tasty. But as ignorance. What is ignorance of what? Of how things exist. Ultimately, finally, the subtlest level at which things exist. So this ignorance is like double trouble ignorance. If you point to that cup and say to me, what is that? If I don't know, I'll just say, I don't know. Well, that's ignorance, isn't it? But that's easy to fix. You just tell me it's a cup. There's no other view in my mind, so I'm ready for the truth, and I'll agree it's a cup. Well, if we had that kind of ignorance, we could be Buddha in a couple of years, I think. Less, maybe. We're so clever. But this ignorance is a double trouble ignorance. Not only do I not know it's a cup, I think it's a peanut or something. Not only do I not know the truth, I've made up a lie. So the problem of practice is because we believed in the lies for 4 million eons, we have to rip out the lies in order to see the truth, in order for the truth to reveal itself. The truth's already there. Like Lama Yeshe says, non-duality, emptiness, Mahamudra, is not difficult to see because it's hiding from us. That's evident it's a cup from day one, but I'm so stupid I've imposed peanut on it. And I believe in peanut, and I'll give my life for my belief. And I believe it instinctively, and I have a panic attack if it's attacked, if my view is attacked. So our job is to unpack the lies, and the truth which is already there in the first place will be revealed to us. Like, duh, it's always been there, So it's double trouble ignorance. That's why it takes so long. So not only, so the lie here, the lie we believe in is the truth, which is the basis of all of our suffering, all of our lifetimes, of all sentient beings. The lie is there's an intrinsic me in here. There's different levels of that intrinsic me. A me that isn't dependent. The key word really is independent. This has got massive meaning in Buddhism. That the way we believe the I exists as something that's independent of everything else. So it's independent finally of the name me, but even at this other level, as we discussed, independent of the other parts of me. So we've got these different levels of understanding this intrinsic me. It is a lie, Buddha says. It does not exist like that. But we believed in it for eons. So the ripping away the lie is the work. And then the truth becomes evident. The truth's there anyway. Reality is there anyway. And this is why Buddha calls it natural law. It's not his reality. He hasn't made it up. He didn't create it. He's not asking us to believe in it. Buddha's getting us to see the truth. And that happens to be the consequence, the experiential implication of this, seeing this truth, is freedom from suffering, is bliss, is joy, is fearlessness, is happiness, is love, is compassion. They are natural. This is how he talks. Ignorance, maripa, unawareness. So then, if it's true that I'm seeing a lie, then I've got to argue with that lie. You don't just sit there and go, everything's empty, everything's empty, everything's empty, and cross your fingers, you know. You've got to argue with the lie, and that's the conceptual side. That's the analytical side. You've got to argue with the lie. And that's, so you've got to first, and even before that, and that means we've got to establish conventionally first how things do exist, conventionally. Which means dependent arising, that whatever exists in the universe, and every day we're creating a million new things. I mean, since Steve Jobs, I think the world has doubled in phenomena, isn't it? The number of phenomena that now exist, I'm sure, is doubled since Steve Jobs. You understand what I'm saying? All the apps and all the billions of new things, and it never ends. Every day we create new phenomena. Things. So the Buddha is saying, everything that does exist conventionally exists in dependence upon certain things, upon certain factors. And he presents it in three levels. And this is mainly arguing with prevailing views at the time that he would disagree with, that he says isn't accurate. So the first level at which things exist, as I said, is causes. So karma is a great example to crack that one. That this I, am the result of countless causes. And you won't find any I among those causes, because I'm nothing other than the culmination of those causes. 1. 2, this I is existing in dependence upon its parts. You won't find any I among those parts. And then finally, I is merely a label that exists in dependence upon the name. These are three ways, dependent arising in terms of causes, parts, and merely labelled. So we have to use hundreds of different logical arguments to argue with ego's absurd misconception that can't see even that conventionally. So first, before we start to discuss something, you have to first be on the same page, don't you? So that means we have to define something. We have to be super clear. Half our problem, when we come to maths and cooking, maths, let's say, you've got really clear definitions. Everything's got a definition. You know that 1 is 1, and nobody will ever think it might be 2. We've all got the same agreement. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, there's never agreement. I'll tell you I love you, and you'll tell me you love me, and we think we're agreeing. That's hilarious. You write down your definition, and I write down mine. We're talking two different languages, because we have no similar definitions. And that's part of our problem. So before we can begin to discuss how something exists ultimately, we've got to first understand what it means conventionally. So what's that, Mummy? Well, that's called a cup, darling. What is it, Mummy? And she'll give me the definition. Well, the definition has two parts. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics. It's a flat, as you can see, sweetheart, it's a flat bottom clay container. That's its conventional characteristics. But I'm not happy yet. But Mummy, what does it do? What's its function? What's its job? That's the main one. It holds my tea. That's its function. This is unbelievably important to get clear. In other words, what's its meaning? That's another way to put it. What is the meaning of that, Mummy? It holds tea, darling. But don't believe her. Don't believe her. Don't just believe what she tells you. Well, she's got to prove it. So what she'll do is she'll get her thermos and she will pour tea into the cup, and you will both see that it fits the definition. It holds tea. Don't be satisfied still. You've now got to check in our conventional world if there's any contradictory valid cognition of that cup that contradicts that cognition. And when we establish there isn't, we all sign the contract, shake hands, join the dots and agree. That's called a cup, conventionally. Now we can begin to discuss how it exists ultimately. And already, actually, by establishing it conventionally, already it's telling us. It's telling us it's empty of intrinsic nature. If we're that clever, we can get it immediately. So you have to have that valid clarity first before we begin to discuss anything. And the whole universe is made up of these phenomena. So when you first study Buddhist philosophy, you study there are about 6 or 7 synonyms for that which exists. And that's crucial because Buddha's getting us to see that which exists. He says, right now we're living in La La Land, cognizing phenomena that don't exist. They don't exist, they're non-existence. The intrinsic cake on that plate doesn't exist. It appears to us as that way. We believe it's that way. It doesn't exist that way. So, there are 4 or 5, I think, or I forget. Phenomenon, object, object of knowledge, existent, established base. They're all synonyms, each a variation, but all pointing to the same thing. They're terms that are used to refer to that which exists. So what Buddha's trying to get us to do is to cognize what exists. Not what he made up, because there's no such thing, but what is already is existing, that which is existing, natural law. So we're talking here conventional, which means made up by our minds. We make up. I mean, nobody heard of an application until Steve Jobs came along, I don't think. Suddenly we've got 4 trillion apps. Now we see them as real, out there, existing from their own side. But we forget we made them up, We make up everything. Every day we can make up things, and it's okay, nothing wrong. But they're all conceptually created. So a valid cognition at a conventional level is the thing has to fulfill its function. So if that's a cup, it has to fulfill the function of a cup. Now that doesn't mean you can't change it. We could use it as a toilet, a very small toilet, but it could be used as a toilet. And then you can change the definition, there's no problem, because it would function. It's got to function as a toilet. You can't call it a knife. Well, you can manage to cut something like a banana, maybe. Do you understand? It's got to function in the way you stated. You can't just make it up and say anything's anything. No. It's very rigorous. It's got to function. That's a crucial piece of information to understand emptiness. It's got to function as the way you establish it. Once we've established the cup that does exist, we now have to investigate, ultimately, how does it exist? And that's where all the logical arguments have to come in. That's why in the monasteries I studied this 40 years, debating and analysing and then meditating, finally getting insight into the reality of it. That there is no intrinsic cup there. There's no cup that is independent of factors. So we hear this and we go, yeah, who cares? Because we don't realise right now that that's what this ignorance is causing us to believe. Because the mistake is so primordial and because everything appears to exist that way, we all buy into it. So we don't even know right now that we're clinging to things as self-existent, as existing from their own side, as existing in and of itself, these synonyms. We don't realise that. That's why when we hear these words, it's puzzling to us. We can understand attachment. We can understand if I'm attached to the cake, it looks extremely delicious. And if I understand that I have aversion for the cake, it looks ugly. We can get that. We can get that the cake we think is on the plate, seen through the lenses of our delusions, isn't on the plate. That we can even get. The same logic here, but the mistake is subtler. The mistake is subtler. So the mistake of attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. The mistake of ego grasping or ignorance in relation to the cake causes the delicious cake to appear out there from its own side, not depending on me seeing it, not depending upon my view. What Buddha's saying is the final meaning of emptiness is there's not a single atom of delicious cake there. It's coming from my mind. But it still functions exactly as established as a chocolate cake that will taste a certain way and will make you full if you eat too much. It will still function as it's established. That's the 2 truths we have to put together that seem contradictory. So one of the first levels of understanding this is to not believe in our karmic appearances. They say even the greatest yogis, in their meditation, they're absorbed in the realisation of emptiness. of intrinsic nature. And then they open up their eyes and they bop back into the regular world with all the delicious, dependent arisings all out there, cakes and toilets and this and that. And they still appear to them as intrinsic. They still appear to come from their own side. They still appear to exist not depending on our mind, but they don't believe it. That's a powerful practice. This is a huge practice. Your delusions start raging in your head and you hear the stories that they're saying, but you don't believe them. You don't give them power. This is a massive, powerful level of practice. They always use the analogy of a magician. It seems like in India, these types of magicians could use mantras and special things to conjure a horse, for example. So the audience is there seeing a horse and believing in a horse. The yogi is there, the magician, like the yogi, also sees a horse, but knows it's not true. That's how we have to live our lives. We'll get realized emptiness very quickly if we can do that. And that's the way they say they see the whole world. Everything is like an illusion, but they still function. It's like an illusion, but the cup still holds your tea. It functions as established. You never lose that, and that's what grounds it. That's what grounds emptiness. Otherwise you sail off into the abyss of the great mistake and fall off the cliff into nihilism. Tsongkhapa, that's why that wonderful poetic praise of Buddha for his teachings on dependent arising, Because dependent arising is the king of logics, as Lama Yeshe puts it, to realize emptiness. So the more we think about dependent arising, which is that things exist in dependence upon this and that, the more it tells us that there is no such thing that doesn't exist without depending upon this or that. So emptiness means emptiness of independence. There can't be anything that's independent because everything is interdependent. The real thing is for emptiness is emptiness of emptiness of independence. And Buddha tells us that because we think everything is independent of our mind, independent of parts, independent of causes and everything else. That's why that we discussed, like, the one about I have a cup and an iPad and a table. Well, I have a nose, a hand and a foot. We establish clearly if that independent in that context is there is an iPad that exists without depending upon a table. There is a cup that exists without depending upon an iPad. In that context, they are independent of each other. That's one example. So it's obvious when the cup breaks, the iPad is not affected. It's clear. Well, the same here. When my foot is hurt, my hand still works. When my nose is cut off, my foot works fine. So then we have to find the I that we believe is there as a separate independent piece. So the foot and the hand and the nose are, within the context of self, are independent phenomena. They're not dependent on each other. It's a fact. But we think there's another one called an I in there that's the big boss part. So if there were an I in there, we would have to point it out as independent of the hand and independent of the foot. And if there were an independent I in there, like the iPad, when the cup breaks, the I wouldn't mind, the self wouldn't mind when the foot breaks. That would be fact. That's logic. But when we say, when our foot breaks, I say, I am in pain. So on a relative level, Buddha's agreeing that there is an I, but it's so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So we know it does exist interdependently, but you can't separate it. You can't point it out. Like you can't separate the base from the cup. If you separate the base, you don't have a cup. If you take away the foot and the hand and all the bits and pieces, there is no I. So I, in the subtlest one, is the name we give to those bits. It's a convenient way of labeling all the bits, But we over-exaggerate its status. We give it this extra status, which it doesn't have. That's ego grasping's job. And this is the root of all suffering, as abstract as that might sound to us. And our job is to see at the subtle level in our mind, nakedly and clearly, the truth that there isn't, never has been, and never could be that kind of I. That's the first moment of our realization of emptiness. That's the first second we become a superior being, and the first moment we climb out of samsara into nirvana. We've got more to go yet. We can't fall back after that. So like any body of knowledge, you just got to understand the words, and then you can start having coherent sentences. People go, oh, I've been thinking about emptiness for 30 years, I don't understand it. And I'll say, well, give me the definition. Oh, I don't know. Well, how the hell can you understand if you can't even say the definition? It's ridiculous. You know, as soon as I hear people talking about, you know, IPs and all those things, I go, huh? Because I don't know the definition. I don't know an IP from a use something else. I know how to work a computer, I can do a few things, but I haven't learned that science. So when you don't know the meaning of the words, you're not stupid, you just have to learn them. When you learn the definitions, you can string together a coherent sentence. And then slowly it begins to, the penny drops, and you start to get the taste of it. It's a very valid method. It's how we learn everything. So learn to put together these words, you know. Independent, object, existent, emptiness. So the other discussion is, like I said, we did this a little bit, let's do more. The other way to look, we need to understand the usage of this word emptiness, because it sounds very abstract to us. We hear it as something weird. So like I said, we go back to this business of how the world consists of phenomena. Everything that can be, and even, it's very interesting, the definition of an existent. This is pretty powerful. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. I mean, that's astonishing. You know, what causes things to be existing is the fact that they can be cognized by mind. That's why mind is absolutely central in Buddhism. It's axiomatic that that which can be cognized by mind, meaning a valid cognition, is that which exists. That's what causes it to be existent. So, whatever can be cognized by mind is called an existent, is an object of knowledge, is an established base, is a phenomenon. Whatever can be cognized by the mind is a phenomenon. And a phenomenon is that which can be cognized by mind, by valid cognition. So, here we're talking about having to cognize what seems like a fairly abstract phenomenon called the absence of something. That's all emptiness refers to, is the absence of something. And we talked about this. We're cognizing absences all the time. If Chuck leaves me and I'm attached to him, all I see in the house every day is the absence of Chuck. So we understand the meaning of an absence of something. It's just a general idea. You know, if you believe there's money in your bank, you believe there's $5,000 in your bank, when you look in the bank, you'll get the shock of your life. You will cognize the absence of a phenomenon. You'll cognize the phenomenon called the absence of $5,000. You will cognize the existent thing called the absence of $5,000. So in this sense, these absences are things made up by our mind. I mean, when you're miserable all day, you don't have a boyfriend, you're just cognizing the absence of a boyfriend. When you're always thinking no one loves you, you're always just cognizing the absence of something. It's something so vivid for us. We're always cognizing absences. I never have enough money. You're cognizing the absence of money. I don't have enough. The absence of food. We're all the time we're cognizing absences. That's what makes us miserable. So here, though, we're trying to cognize an absence that will be joyful to discover, like the absence of cancer. You've lived your whole life believing you've got cancer. You're getting ready for death. Everybody feels sorry for you. You look long-faced and miserable and depressed. And you discover one day there is no cancer. You just cognize the amazing phenomenon called the absence of cancer, the emptiness of cancer. Emptiness just means absence. Don't give it a holy meaning. Emptiness of intrinsic existence, of course, is pretty intense. But the word in general is nothing special. The absence of something. Huh? Yes. Yeah, go. Where?
So is the same time existent and delusion?
What?
The same time is existence and delusion?
I don't know the question. I can't understand it.
Since it's lack of it.
What?
Since it's lack of it. Like,
Since
like lack of boyfriend.
Lack of it.
I hear it. I hear that. I'm trying to hear it.
Mind cognize this, so it's existence.
What? I hear her words. I'm trying to get her meaning. Please, let her talk.
That existence is which the mind can cognize.
What?
The existence of
No, the word is a noun called an existent.
Yes.
It's a term that's synonymous with the word phenomenon or the word object. It's a thing that exists. So whatever exists. So that's we've established. So what's your question?
Yes.
So go on.
So if the is existence of lack of boyfriend.
Okay, you haven't got a boyfriend. I was using that as a simple example of how we are always cognizing absences of something.
Yes.
So what's your question?
Is the same time delusion.
What is delusion?
I can say the lack of the boyfriend. Is
But what's the delusion here? What? This is not the discussion in
the
this.
story the mind created.
But that's not what we're discussing here. That's not the discussion here at all. What you're saying isn't the point here. You're nodding at me as if somehow you understand, but I'm not sure you do.
Yeah, I'm trying to put this together.
I know that, but listen, what I'm saying to you is what you've just concluded isn't the issue here. This is not the point. What you're saying is that that's delusion. Of course it is, but that's not the point here. I'm just giving a simple example of how we could use the understanding of how the absence of something does exist.
Yeah, I get that.
That's all we're talking about.
All right.
Whether it's a delusion is another discussion here.
Okay.
So there is a phenomenon. All I'm trying to get our head around is the way of describing that what can be cognized by the mind is a phenomenon. So if you're cognizing the absence of a boyfriend, that absence of a boyfriend is a phenomenon that does exist. That is all I'm discussing here. It's not relevant that it's delusion. That isn't the issue. So say back to me what I said. What am I saying to you?
Well, you're saying that doesn't. That's different story about delusion.
So what am I saying?
That the fact that is a lack of the boyfriend means is an object. It's
Precisely.
Yeah.
Is an existent, is a phenomenon. So the lack of boyfriend is a real phenomenon that does exist.
Yeah.
It's simply getting our head around the way of describing things in a negating way. That's all I'm doing here.
Yeah.
So now we're communicating. Thank you very much. Okay. Are we communicating, people? That's all I'm trying to do here, is get our head around the idea that we are all the time cognizing phenomena that happen to be a negating phenomenon. It's like a minus number. You know, it's pretty abstract. -2, you know, all these minus numbers. It's a real phenomenon. So here we're talking about the absence of something. It is a real phenomenon for you if you cognize in your cup the absence of tea. That all I'm getting around here, the only point I'm making is trying to get us to hear that a phenomenon is a thing that exists. And a thing that exists is something cognized by the mind. And what we're trying to do is become familiar with the way of describing that there are some phenomena that happen to be the absence of something. So the absence of a boyfriend is a real phenomenon that my mind does cognize. Are we communicating? That's all. That was all I'm trying to do. So, of course, the quality of the absences are very different, you know? Where? Yes?
I hope this is not...
Go, John, whatever it is, go. It's great.
I think I'm following you, but I'm just wondering, respectfully, what's the point? Is this part of the theory? I'm following it, but what's the point? Is this point of
What's the point?
Yeah.
Okay. In this discussion about the absence of a boyfriend or the absence of dollars in a bank are simple examples to get our head around the idea that the mind can cognize the absence of something. Can you get that? So the point of that is a simple example to get us to hear that what Buddha wants us to cognize finally in our subtle meditation, the absence of an inherent I. And when we realize that absence, then we are liberated from suffering. I'm just trying to use conventional, ordinary examples. Because if we keep talking about the emptiness of an inherent I, first of all, we don't know what an inherent I is. So then we confuse that, and then we don't know what emptiness means. So I'm just using simple, daily, ordinary examples of how we all the time cognizing absences of something to get our head around the concept of its being a valid object that does exist, an absence of something. But the point is that now the real absence we're trying to get, to try to cognize in our mind, is the absence of the I we've always thought was there, that never has been there. That's when we realize emptiness. Do you get my point now? Okay, good. Are we communicating, people? All right. Any other questions, people? I mean, sometimes when I discuss like this, and then I get people asking me questions, I realize I'm leading them up a garden path, and I think it's a stupid idea that I'm saying these things. But if you can get the point, which is why your question was perfect, you know.
So
say, for example, that mountain out there, that's, would you say that's dependent on all of the causes that made it to be there?
That's one level of dependent arising. A mountain exists in dependence upon countless causes. Absolutely.
And the parts.
And then the second level of dependent arising, more subtle, a mountain is made up of millions of parts. So therefore it exists, the way they say it is, it therefore exists in dependence upon its parts.
And then it's a mountain because we label it.
And then finally it's a mountain dependent arising, it as is mountain dependent upon the mind labeling it a mountain. They're the three levels of dependent arising. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. But then what?
So that the emptiness is basically that it only exists in that way. It's not a solid mountain.
Emptiness, when you realize that the mountain is made up of causes and you won't find a mountain among the causes, you realize the emptiness of a mountain that doesn't depend upon causes. When you go to the subtle level and you think about how a mountain is made of all its parts, but you won't find any mountain among those parts, then you realize the emptiness of a mountain that doesn't depend upon parts. And then when you realize the subtlest one, the real meaning, that there is no mountain there that doesn't depend upon a mind, and then you realize the absence of a mountain that is independent of the mind labeling it that. Yes, exactly. That's right. That's how we have to think it through. I mean, in ordinary words, you know, in a way, they say that the subtlest one is merely labelled. The dependent arising of merely labelled, which is that there's no mountain from the side of the, without depending upon the mind labelling it. That, in a way, is the most difficult. It is the most difficult. It's the subtlest one, the final one. But in a way, it seems easier. Like when I always mention the example of, you know, of like the $5 note is a really good example. In itself, from the conventional point of view, it's a piece of paper, and in fact a very dirty, smelly piece of paper, and probably with really crummy art, badly designed. It's in ordinary words, it's like nothing. But because we give it the meaning of $5, and we know the meaning of $5 is you can get a delicious cake for it. So it's got a real meaning for us, but it's clearly not evident in that dirty piece of paper. This is really clearly proving it's made by the mind. That's evidence that $5 is on ordinary level is a dirty piece of paper with 5 on the corner. And you know, if it's an American one, it looks like the same as all the others with green printing with some bloke on it. We don't, you know, so the meaning, and this is why meaning really is is the word. The meaning we get, the meaning that $5 is got is not in that piece of paper. The meaning comes from our mind. This proves that it is empty of existing without depending on the mind calling it that. If it were, this is the point, if it were intrinsically $5, if it were in the $5, the moment anybody saw $5, they'd realize the meaning. And we know that's not true. That means I could read Tibetan right now because it's self-existent. And it's not, it's obvious. Depends on the mind. That's proving merely labelled. We can get that, you know. So the hard part is to get to see how I am merely labelled. That's too difficult for us. I am merely labelled. I, according to the parts, that's easier. That's much easier. But that's not the subtlest one. We can see if we do that analysis. I have a nose, a hand and a foot. I have a, you know, so from the point of view of the I have an iPad, a table and a cup, there's 4 separate phenomena there. I, in that context, is one of the phenomena. It's one of the phenomena, and it's called I. There's another one called iPad, another one called table, another one called cup. They're clearly independent of each other in terms of their function. Which means when one breaks, the other doesn't mind. The same, it would have to be logically the same. We'd have to point out, we can point out the foot, and we can point out the nose, and we can point out the hand. But we can't locate and point out a separate piece called I. If we could, then it would be like the hand and the foot. The hand doesn't get hurt if the foot gets hurt. The I wouldn't feel it. The I, you wouldn't say, I am in pain. You wouldn't say that if there were a separate I, because the foot is hurt, not the I. And this takes time to hear. So this is the parts one. It's very helpful to analyze like this. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Okay. That's why we talk how we talk. Our language expresses it. I did not do that. How dare you say that to me? You know, this me is the central player in our head every second. And this is the point. What Buddha is saying a valid cognition is a cognition. There has to be a referent object. Well, there isn't one, he says. This I, the self-existent I, doesn't have a referent object. It's a fantasy. There's a conventional I. That's why we use the word. But we can't tell the difference. We can't tell the difference. And that's the difference we have to tell. That's what we have to learn. So one way of saying it is when the ego grasping exaggerates, gives this extra status to everything. Like puts extra bells and whistles on everything, you know. That's why the only way we can hear things now is in the two extreme views. When we hear there's no I from its own side, there's no I, might as well kill myself, you know, nihilistic. There's no I. It's non-existent. And then we hear there's a dependent arising I, we go to the other extreme and say, oh, thank God there is something, grasp. That's existent. So we think there's, you know, we can think, well, Buddha, make up your mind. It either exists or it doesn't. But it's more nuanced than that. That's the trouble we have to try and get our head around. As Lama Zopa says, when you realize the emptiness of I, it's as if there's no I. But there is. But it's so subtle. It's as if it doesn't exist. And that's not just clever yogi words. That's reality that we have to eventually get, you know. This kind of non-contradictoriness between the two truths, relative and absolute, conventional and ultimate.
Question?
Yeah.
So when the head kept going to the surface.
What, darling?
For air, so when the head kept going to the surface for air.
Yes, when I was Zopa.
No I. When he was drowning.
He was not having any fear-based, panic-stricken sense of I am drowning. Not even my head. We'd say, and that's a really good thing, the way they talk, and it's a really excellent practice. And even when they talk about the mind, you know, we say my anger, my depression, my jealousy, like this big lump of me. But they talk about jealousy thinks this and anger thinks that. It's very helpful to think that way, to be, you know, to be more separate from the I all the time. So the way he said it was, the head, not my head, came to the surface. He observed the fact. He's not stupid. He would say I, knowing he's Zopa. He knows he's him. But there's no this extra kind of status of I, which is the panic. None of that. None of that. And even though he was drowning and the head probably was coming up, gasping for air, his mind would have been peaceful. Yeah. And as we progress even ordinarily in life, we can learn to get this type of response. We won't panic so much when bad things happen. As we keep understanding this, you'll get more and more stable and less hysterical when things go wrong, you know. Do you understand? Because, as Lama Yeshe says, when you realize Mahamudra, there is no fear. He says, isn't that beautiful, you know? And that's the point. When finally all the delusions go, there is no fear. There can't be fear. There's just clarity. Even as Lama Zopa was drowning, his mind was peaceful. That's very weird for us, you know. Because we think immediately that means he doesn't care. We either think we've got to be hysterical or don't care. We're either nihilistic or the other extreme. Always two extremes, you know. But he was working to survive, just like anybody else, but his mind was clear. And he's probably laughing about it. Yeah. Let's have a cup of tea then.